Welcome. Let's understand what exactly is JWT or JSON Web Token. JWT is an open industry standard that allows stateless authentication between two entities. For example, in this case, client and server, when we are talking about the regular web flow where the client or the browser or mobile app talks to a backend server which is built in any technology. So there has to be a stateless authentication mechanism between the two entities, and that's where JWT as a standard helps us. So how exactly JWT works in a web application? So there's a user who goes to the browser and tries to access a website, and of course the user will be asked for the username and password. When the user enters the details and clicks submit, there's an API call or the backend service is called and it checks whether this username and password exist in the database. If it does not exist, then the application, which is the backend application, gives a message that it's invalid credentials or unauthorized user. But if the user is found in the database, then what happens? The backend application, who is implementing the JWT authentication mechanism, will basically generate a token. And this token is comprised of certain subparts which basically represent something which we will talk about later. And this token is basically generated on the server by using a secret key which is stored on the server. And then this token is returned to the client along with certain data embedded inside it, like user ID or email. After that, the web browser receives this token and stores it in its temporary location. From next request onwards, the user does not have to always send username and password to let know the server that this is exactly this user who is trying to access this application again. Instead, the user will send this particular token which was provided to the user on the successful login. Couple of things to know here is that this token is short-lived. It will expire after a point of time. Then user will be asked to log in again, and once successful login, user will get a new token which can be used for a certain amount of time. Another thing that can be done with this token is authorization. Authorization is if this user has a certain role and allowed to access certain part of the application, only those part of the application can be accessed by this user. That is called authorization. So with JWT token, authentication and authorization both can be managed. So let's see what happens when the user tries to s- access the application with an active token. So now, as the user has an active token, tries to access the certain other part of the application, and this time the browser application or the client-side applications knows the token and sends that token. Inside that token, there's already a user ID being embedded. So now the server gets that token, server validates that token and checks whether it's a valid token or not, and it uses the same secret key to unpack the token and verify its authenticity. If the token is tampered, then the secret key will be used to decode it, hence there will be an error, so the tampered token will be rejected. But then if the token is valid, the secret key will be used on the server to decode the token, and from the token the claim or the payload, in this case it's only the user ID, but there can be more information which can be sent for the first time when the token was created inside the payload. So for the valid token, this user ID claim will be extracted, and from that user ID the backend server can query the database and fetch the details of the user ID and then return the information to the user. Let's say in this case the account information. but it can be anything else as well. One thing to note is this secret key is on the server and it is not known to the client, hence there is no chance that it can be hacked. So this is the complete flow, how a user is able to access a web application in a stateless manner once it is authenticated with username and password. For the successive request, it's the JWT token that takes care of the complete authentication and authorization mechanism for that user. Thank you. Welcome back. Let's look at the official website of JWT, which is jwt.io. On this website, it also mentions that JSON Web Token is or are open industry standard method for representing claims securely between two parties. What exactly is a claim? So let's go ahead and check a sample JWT token, how it looks. Any JWT token comprises of three parts. One is the red section here, then a dot, then a purple or blue section, and a dot, and then a sky blue section. These are the three parts of any JWT token. If you decode, you get these three parts. The first part, which is the red part, comprises of the header section, which talks about the algorithm and the token type. That is this part. The second part, which is this part, is the payload data, which is nothing but in a way claim as well. In our example earlier, it is the user ID that we used here. User ID 999. That's the claim for our case, our token. But here it's three values: subject, name, and something else. And the third part, which is the sky blue part of the JWT token, can comprise of the signature. And this is the signature which is always used to verify the authenticity of the token. How is it created? It's created by taking the base 64 URL encoding of the header value, which is this, base 64 of the payload value, which is this, and the secret key that was used to encode this token. Then this generates a token, and that particular token is then used for subsequent transaction between the client and server without the need of any username and password until the time this token expires. So if you observe in the header, there was algorithm mentioned and type mentioned. So type is always token, but algorithm is the that particular algorithm which will be used in the signature to do the encoding. This is the algorithm which was mentioned here, and that was used for the particular creation or creation of the signature that will be used for verification. So header describes the algorithm and type of the token, and the payload is the data which we want in to be sent in the token between the client and server, and the signature is the third part, which is nothing but the digital signature which will be used for validation and authentication, and this is made out of the algorithm mentioned in the header. That algorithm is applied on the data when the data is the payload, header, and the secret key stored on the server. So this is an example of JWT token, and this is how it looks and what are the different parts of the JWT token and why they are meant in such way. So again, JWT token is used for authentication and authorization in a stateless manner between client and server. Thank you.
Welcome students. Let's go ahead and understand the complete workflow of JWT. So if you see this picture, there are different kinds of components mentioned here. Filter, service, validator, contact security holder, and then Spring Security Authorization Process Controller Database. But then, how exactly the complete flow works, we will go step by step. So this is our request, let's say Postman or a front-end application or another microservice talking to our application. It triggers a HTTP request. Then it first reaches this JWT authentication filter, there is a custom made filter which we will write. And of course, if this request does not hold a JWT, it's going to throw a 403 error, which is unauthorized. But if this has a JWT token, then the request gets forwarded to the JWT service, which we will write in our code. And this JWT service will now validate the JWT and then extract the JWT token. And from that extracted JWT token, it will check if there's a user found or not, because every JWT token will have a username. If the user is not found, again it will throw a 403. But if the user is found, then we will call a user detail service, and in this we will write a method to load the user from the database with the username, and we will try to look for that particular user in the DB. If the user is found in the DB, then it's well and good. If the user is not found, again we will go via this route for 403 unauthorized access. But if the user is found, then the flow will come on this side, and then it will go ahead and update the context security folder. And now, after the context security folder is updated, it will go to Spring Security Authorization process, where it will update all the rules, and the rule-based authorization will be handled by this mechanism. You can also say roles or authorities will be updated here. And finally, whatever was the request for the specific endpoint of the controller will be routed to that particular specific controller, to that endpoint, and then the controller will do the processing. Let's say it goes to the service and fetches data from the database via the repository, and converts it to the JSON and returns it back to the user. Along the way, if the validation of JWT fails here, it's again going to give the 403 invalid exception. So this is the complete flow how JWT works, and these are the different components which we will be going ahead and creating in our practical code base. Thank you.